Hello, everybody, and welcome into this Friday and, of course, Christmas Day edition of the Pack-A-Day podcast. Thanks for taking some time to join me on Christmas Day here on YouTube. I really appreciate it. I hope your holidays are going amazingly well and that you're having an amazing Christmas for those who celebrate. I'm going to be talking some Packers in just a moment. I want to go over that Vikings-Saints game and how it could potentially impact the Packers. I'm also going to talk some Tim Boyle because you know what? Joey from Underage Packers was just, mocking me for my prison-esque background prior to Bart Starr being up there, and of course my Tim Boyle takes. So it's Christmas Day, and I'm going to give myself a little bit of a gift, and I'm going to talk some Tim Boyle, and I'll explain why in just a moment, because it's not just that I want to talk about Tim Boyle. It's a topic that's come up on Twitter and on Packers Radio recently as well. So I'm going to go over that in just a moment. But before I get to that, I want to quickly, on this Christmas Day, thank you, the listener, for being so supportive throughout the year, not only here on YouTube, but over on our audio edition of the Pack-A-Day podcast as well. And I just want to really quickly take a moment, if you'll indulge me, to thank the rest of the members of the Pack-A-Day podcast team, because I could not do this without them. They are great podcasters. They are amazingly knowledgeable when it comes to the Packers, but they are even better people. I appreciate them so much, and I just want to take some time to shout them out and thank them today. So I'm going to start right down the list. Alex Strofe, Andrew Merteg, Ben Fennell, Brennan Rupp, Dan Kotnick, Dusty Evely, Gage Bridgeford, Jacob Morley, Jacob Westendorf, Jason Perrone, Janelle Mackey, Jimmy Christensen. We have way too many J names, and that's going to have to change in 2021. Sorry for those with J names. We just have too many. We've met our quota. Kyle Fellows, Maggie Loney, Mark Eckel, Matt Freilich, Mike Wentlant, Owen Reese, Paul Brettel, Perry Goldstein, Rob Rieger, Ross Uglum, Russell Brown, Sarah Kelleher, Steve Perhatch, Tyler Grezagoric. Thank you all so incredibly much for, again, not only the work you do on the podcast, but for just being amazing people day in and day out. Thank you for those of you who are no longer on the podcast team any longer, but have helped us along the way and get launched and started. You've meant a tremendous amount to me as well. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank all of them today, because I could not do this without them. So thank you for those who are listening to, allow me a couple minutes and indulging me to say thank you to some people who mean a hell of a lot to me. So appreciate that. So let's go over some football stuff, because I know that's what you're here for. And let's start off with Vikings and Saints. And on the surface, this game seems like it may not mean a ton to the Green Bay Packers. For those of you who've been following along, the easiest way for the Packers to secure that number one seed in the playoffs is simply to beat the Chicago Bears in Week 17. They do that, nothing else matters. Even if they lose to Chicago, they can actually clinch it in Week 16, that number one seed, by beating the Tennessee Titans in Week 16 and having the Rams beat the Seahawks in Week 16. If that happens, Green Bay also gets the number one seed, and Week 17 won't even matter. They could also beat the Titans, lose to the Bears, and then the Seahawks could beat the Rams this week, but then the Seahawks could lose next week, and Green Bay could get in that way. So there's a lot of different options that are out there, but again, take care of your own business, beat the Bears, and you're going to eventually get that number one seed, even if, no matter what happens to the Titans. And of course, I know that everyone's just going to say, you know what, take care of your own business, win your last two games, and you don't have to worry about anything else. Go into the postseason strong and beating the Titans and the Bears, and that's your best case scenario. And of course, I'm certainly not going to argue that, and certainly that's what I'm going to hope for as well. But the reason why I want to touch on this game just ever so briefly, because one, who doesn't want somebody to cheer for on Christmas Day? But there is a couple unique scenarios that could play out in Week 17 where it's not actually unheard of that the Packers could get the number one seed with losing both games. And I know what you're thinking. We don't even want to play out this scenario, right? Because if the Packers lose their last two games against the Titans and the Bears, they don't deserve the number one seed, and they're probably not that good of a football team anyway. They're not going to go in with any momentum, and yada, yada, yada. And I get that. I fully understand that. But at the same token, if you can lose both games and still get the one seed, I'd rather have that than lose both games and get like the 3 seed, right? So let's just play it out for a second. Indulge me for a second on this scenario. So if the Vikings do in fact beat the Saints on Christmas Day, which isn't totally unheard of, the Saints didn't look particularly good with Drew Brees back this past week. So if the Vikings do beat the Saints, really only one thing in Week 17 needs to go right in order for the Packers to get the number one seed, even if they lose both games. It's not difficult at all. So whoever wins the Seahawks-Rams game this week just needs to lose in Week 17. That's it. If the winner of the Week 16 game against the Rams and the Seahawks, loses in week 17, Green Bay can lose both games. Again, assuming the Saints lose to the Vikings this week, just one thing needs to happen, and the Packers go on as the number 1 seed. And there's one of those scenarios that isn't far-fetched at all. If the Rams were to beat the Seahawks this week, which is certainly plausible, I know the Rams just lost to the Jets, but the Rams are still a good football team, and beating the Seahawks is not out of the realm of possibility whatsoever. If the Rams beat the Seahawks, then the Rams lose to the Cardinals, who, by the way, the Cardinals almost surely will need to win that game in week 17, or at least go into that game feeling like they need to win that game in week 17 in order to get into the playoffs. It's not unheard of that they could easily beat the Rams in that game. And if those two things happen and the Saints lose to the Vikings, the Packers can lose both games to get the number 1 seed. Is that what I want to happen? No. Is that what anyone wants to happen? No. But all you do is you get that 1 seed, and even if you're going off of 2 losses, right, which would be horrible and terrible, but you win that first playoff game at home against a good football team, and those 2 losses at the end of the season, they're going to be forgotten about because you're 2 games away from winning a Super Bowl at that point. Nobody's going to be thinking about in the NFC Championship game, well, we're going to go out and try, but we lost those last 2 games against the Titans and Bears, so it's probably not going to happen. Like, no, you're in the NFC Championship game with just 1 win after that. Who cares how you got the 1 seed? So, again, just beat the Bears, take care of business. Hell, just win both games, take care of business. And I think we can all say that's what we're hoping for and wanting. But I did want to play this out where there's at least some horse in the race. And I know it's, it doesn't make for a lot of fun on Christmas Day cheering for the Vikings. And I don't even necessarily say that should be the case. I don't think you should ever cheer for Minnesota. But maybe don't be too disappointed if in some way, shape, or form they beat the Saints. 2 other small reasons why I think maybe it's a little bit better for the Vikings to win. First of all, they're not going to the playoffs. So let them pile up some wins, get some confidence in Mike Zimmer and Kirk Cousins, bring that group back for another season. Don't make any wholesale changes and get yourself a worse draft pick while you're at it. That would be just perfect. So there's definitely some advantageous situations there. So, 8-8, the Vikings are certainly where they could end the season if they win their last 2 games. That is the best place that you want those Minnesota Viking and Chicago Bears teams. No threat of the playoffs. No threat of getting an early draft pick, maybe one of those top quarterbacks and altering the shape and size of your franchise and the expectations of your franchise. So that's a really good spot for the Vikings to be in. So a win for them doesn't hurt too much either. On the same token, the Saints losing, maybe Drew Brees looks horrible against that Vikings defense, and you've got maybe some quarterback questions of whether or not he can still do it, whether he can still win. You've got some questions floating in the Saints' minds as they head into the playoffs of whether or not they could go into Green Bay, a cold weather stadium with a struggling Drew Brees that doesn't have the arm that he used to. That's not the worst case scenario either. If you have to face the Saints in the playoffs, maybe, some of that, some of that poor juju from losing to the Vikings and maybe finishing the season poorly, maybe that could have an impact on them in the playoffs as well. So I know it's not fun to cheer for Minnesota. And again, I'm not necessarily advocating for it, but I think you can make a strong argument that if you're looking at this game or watching this game on Christmas Day, maybe not the worst thing if the Vikings actually pick up the win over the Saints. All right, one other topic. I get to talk some Tim Boyle really, really quick. Tim Boyle, Jordan Love. If the Packers do, in fact, clinch the number 1 seed in week 16 and go into week 17 with a game against the Bears not mattering, what should happen? Should the Packers start Aaron Rodgers? Should they start Jordan Love? Should they start Tim Boyle? I know my best friend in the world, Peter Bukowski, is very much on the train that the Packers should start Jordan Love. There's no reason to start Tim Boyle. Jordan Love is the future. You want to see what you got. And I understand that concept to some extent. I think it would be really nice to see what Jordan Love has. This is basically the equivalent of a preseason game. You spent the first round pick on him. Who doesn't want to see Jordan Love? And I'll be the first to admit, if he goes out there, I will be eyes glued to the television. Not that I wouldn't with Tim Boyle, and really excited to see what Jordan Love can do. However, if it's me and what I honestly think the Packers will do, I think Aaron Rodgers gets at least a couple drives in that scenario. I think he goes out and at least gets a few snaps, some live bullets, and maybe some max protection, maybe some quick throws. So, he's not subjected to any major hits or anything like that. But I don't necessarily know that you want to go 2 weeks without Aaron Rodgers in the starting offense playing before you go into a divisional round game that everyone knows is going to be against a very tough opponent, regardless of who they play. So I think you want to see some live action for those starters, including Aaron Rodgers, but probably a couple drives. And then again, what I would do and what I think will happen, I think you start Tim Boyle. And really quickly, nobody really knows at this point what Tim Boyle has and why it's more important to see what you have in Tim Boyle right now than Jordan Love. Jordan Love, you have the foreseeable future to figure out, the next few years to figure out what you have in Jordan Love at quarterback. Tim Boyle is a restricted free agent. And there's some really interesting scenarios where if you don't tender him anything, of course he's going to go to another team. If you tender him as a original round pick, he's an undrafted free agent. So some team's going to sign him, and Tim Boyle's going to want to go elsewhere because there's nowhere to go here, right? The quarterback of now is Aaron Rodgers. The quarterback of the future is Jordan Love. If you're Tim Boyle, that's not a great situation to be in. If you tender him a second round pick, now you're talking about a $4 to $5 million, I think it's a $4 million-ish dollar investment on Tim Boyle that you have to pay for one season, and you still have Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love on your payroll in a year where the salary cap is going to be really, really tight. So that's a tough pill to swallow. But you've put in 3 years and developed him, and there have been scouts around the league, if you remember that Bob McGinn article from The Athletic around draft time, that believe that Tim Boyle has a potential future in the NFL. Maybe not as a high-end starter or anything like that, but maybe a bottom-end starter, a top-tier backup. That's a $10 million player in today's NFL if you're a top-tier backup. So it would not shock me at all if some team took a flyer on him. And I think if you go out and allow him to play, you get a better gauge as to whether or not you want to keep him and continue to develop him, then you may have something in him. Or if you're just saying, you know what, we're willing to let him walk. On the same token, if he goes up and lights up the Bears Matt Flynn style, like Matt Flynn did in that Week 17 game against the Lions, you put a second round tender on him, I don't think it's completely out of the question that some team might not take a flyer and say, you know what, we'll give a late second round pick to see what Tim Boyle can do. Maybe in a very similar situation to what happened with Matt Flynn, where they gave him a contract, still drafted a quarterback, and said, we just need one of these quarterbacks to turn out. So do I think that's likely? No, but is it possible? Yes. And most importantly of all of this is when I watched Jordan Love in practice in training camp, and granted, there was no rookie minicamp, no OTAs, he was by far and away the third quarterback and just not ready to play in the NFL. And the worst thing that you can do for Jordan Love is put him in if he's not ready yet. And who knows if he is. Matt LaFleur just this week when I asked him said, in his press conference, said that he's made great progress so far this season. So maybe he is more ready than he was back then, which I would expect. But if he's even an iota of not ready yet, there's no reason to get him in that game. So I would expect all three quarterbacks to be active if this situation comes to fruition. I would expect Rodgers to start, Boyle to play the bulk of the game. Maybe you get Jordan Love in at the end just for a drive or two, just for kicks and giggles, because it's basically a preseason game for the Green Bay Packers. I got to talk Tim Boyle on Christmas. I am a very happy person. Thank you so much for joining me. I actually did the audio version of the podcast today. I talked about Tim Boyle, Jordan Love as well, but I talked about a lot of other stuff, including my key matchups and X factors for the game. So make sure to check that out wherever you get your favorite podcasts, because I know all you want to do on Christmas Day is hear my voice for an hour. Probably just go spend some time with your family instead. But if you have a long drive to family, make sure to check it out. I'd appreciate it greatly. Thanks so much for joining me. As always, actually, I'm going to start by saying Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and as always, and most importantly, go Pack Go.